Good evening. There has been widespread condemnation of the killing of the crime reporter Veronica Guerin, who was shot in Dublin this afternoon. Media colleagues here, in Britain and in France, have described her death as an attack on democracy. The Taoiseach promised the full resources of the state would be brought to bear to find her killers, as Guerin was gunned down in her car as she waited at traffic lights on the Naas dual carriageway. Two men on a Dublin-registered motorbike drove alongside. The pillion passenger opened fire. In the past 2 years, she had been the subject of 2 previous gun attacks.
Veronica Guerin was returning from a court sitting in Naas when her attackers struck. For once, her court appearance was for personal reasons. She had been charged with speeding and feared she was about to lose her driving licence. But, a lifelong football fan, her thoughts were also on tonight's Euro 96 semi-finals. Michael Hickey sat next to her in court.
We talked about sport in general, and one of the things that she wanted to do this evening was watch the soccer match on television this evening.
So what would you say that, you know, what was uppermost in her mind when you were chatting to her? What was she talking about?
Well, I think the possibility of losing the driving licence was the foremost in her mind at all times. And, you know, I wouldn't ever have known that there might have been anything else to be concerned by talking to her or anything. She seemed to be quite relaxed and quite happy.
In an ironic twist, one of the first people on the scene was local parish priest Father Heber McMahon. He was the priest who married Veronica Guerin to building contractor Graham Turley.
She had a great mixture of gifts, and she certainly was a very brave woman.
And what kind of person was she aside from all of that, the public side of her?
In the nicest possible sense of the word, I'd say a very ordinary person. It's a tragedy, really.
Veronica Guerin had twice previously been the victim of gun attacks. Tonight, Gardaí aren't ruling out a link with those incidents, but they stress they're keeping an open mind.
Well, she was injured in a shooting incident before, and there was an investigation, a very thorough investigation carried out into that, and there wasn't anyone brought before the courts. And indeed, we'll be focusing our attention in a number of areas, and certainly we'll be taking that into account.
As the scene of the shooting here at Clondalkin is being cleared, the huge Garda manhunt for Veronica Guerin's killers is continuing. This evening, Gardaí issued a description of the 2 men who carried out the attack. The first is a heavy-set man, aged about 30. The second, a much smaller man. They made their getaway in a white motorcycle, wearing white crash helmets.
Home for Veronica Guerin was this converted roadside cottage at Clochran near Dublin Airport, a home she shared with her husband Graham and their 6-year-old son Cathal. This afternoon, accompanied by detectives, Graham, a builder, came to the house to collect personal belongings. His brother-in-law, Ray Brennan, told me that Graham had been devastated by the murder and he appealed for privacy in the immediate aftermath of the killing. At the offices of independent newspapers in Middle Abbey Street, fellow journalists and other staff were numbed by the news of Veronica Guerin's killing. The normally noisy newsroom was subdued as fellow journalists gathered details of the shooting. She had phoned the news desk on her mobile phone just 5 minutes before she died. She was returning to the office, she said, for a meeting about a story which she was covering on an ongoing basis. Sunday Independent editor Angus Fanning was in London when the news reached him, and he returned immediately to Dublin.
This is one of the darkest days in the history of Irish journalism and in the history of independent newspapers. Veronica Guerin was a remarkable journalist. In my 30 years in newspapers, I have not encountered a journalist to equal her bravery and her dedication to the job.
You and Veronica must have been well aware that the dangers that she was in undertaking this kind of work.
We were indeed, and as you know, the most elaborate security precautions had been put in place around her home. And for a period after the shooting incident early last year, there was guard protection.